It was a quiet Friday evening in a leafy neighborhood in Maplewood, New Jersey, the kind of suburb where every house had a porch swing and the smell of freshly cut grass lingered in the air. Helen stood by the kitchen window, wiping her hands on a soft kitchen towel, watching the sky darken with that familiar early summer haze. She was 43, elegant in an understated way, with soft brown eyes that held stories no one asked about anymore. She'd been alone for 2 years now, ever since her husband, David, decided life with someone younger suited him better. Since then, the big house had become quieter, lonelier, more like a memory than a home. But tonight was different. Her stepson Ryan was coming back from college, and he was bringing a friend. She'd cooked all afternoon, not because anyone expected her to, but because it made her feel needed. When the car finally pulled into the driveway, her breath caught for a moment. Ryan looked just like David had at 22, carefree, charming, full of loud energy. But the man walking beside him wasn't what she expected. Ethan. Tall, lean, and quiet in that mysterious way that made you want to know more. His eyes met hers when he entered the house, and for a brief second, she forgot to breathe. It wasn't that he was striking, though he was handsome, but there was something deeper in his gaze, something knowing, gentle, and unshaken. She smiled politely, heart fluttering against her will, telling herself it was just the surprise of seeing someone new. Dinner was warm, loud, and full of stories. The boys talked about college, late-night pizza, terrible professors, and dreams that sounded too far away. Helen poured wine, passed plates, and smiled like a hostess trained for the role. But Ethan kept looking at her when he thought she wasn't watching. His eyes weren't curious, they were respectful, aware, and strangely adult for someone his age. When he complimented her cooking, it wasn't in a throwaway way. It was intentional, like he wanted her to feel seen. And maybe that's what she craved most. It had been so long since someone noticed her, not as Ryan's stepmother or David's ex-wife, but as a woman. She found herself laughing more than she expected, leaning into the table, brushing her hair behind her ear when she caught him watching her again. The warmth in her cheeks wasn't from the wine alone. The evening carried on gently, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with music from the boys' playlist. But Helen's mind was already wandering, caught in the unexpected pull of something unspoken. She was too old to feel like this, and he was too young for her to even think it. But still, when Ethan picked up a dish and helped her carry it to the sink after dinner, their fingers touched for a second too long. A spark. No, it was probably nothing. Probably. Yet the way he looked at her when he said, "You must have been tired, cooking all day," was different. Like he knew what it meant for someone to care without being cared for. Helen's heart beat a little faster, and she turned away, busying herself with dishes. But her thoughts didn't settle. That night, as the boys laughed downstairs, and the house grew quieter, Helen stood in the kitchen under the dim light, asking herself a question she hadn't thought about in years: what if someone really saw me again? The house had quieted down, the kind of silence that falls after laughter fades and the night grows still. Downstairs, Ryan and Ethan were in the basement, the glow of their video game screen flickering through the floorboards like distant fireworks. Helen stayed upstairs, moving slowly around the kitchen, pretending to tidy up even though the space was already spotless. She wasn't cleaning, she was stalling. Her mind was loud, and her heart felt restless in a way she couldn't explain. That feeling Ethan stirred earlier, just a glance, a touch, a tone in his voice, it lingered. She tried to shake it off. He was just being kind. Just a polite young man from Boston who happened to notice things. But it had been so long since someone had looked at her like that, with warmth, with curiosity, like she was more than just background. She poured herself a small glass of red wine and stood by the sliding glass door that overlooked the backyard. The night was warm, the moon bright. And then, she heard footsteps. Slow, careful ones. She turned around just as Ethan stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, holding his own half-empty glass. "Sorry," he said with a soft smile. "Didn't mean to startle you." Helen shook her head gently, trying not to look flustered. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Not really," he replied, walking a little closer, the air between them filling again with something quiet but thick. "The basement couch isn't as comfortable as Ryan promised." They both laughed lightly. Helen gestured to the counter. "Want some tea?" He nodded. She moved around the kitchen with practiced grace, pulling down mugs, boiling water, pretending this was just a normal, innocent moment. But nothing about it felt normal. The silence between words was weighted. When she handed him the tea, their fingers touched again, just like earlier, and this time neither of them moved away too quickly. Ethan leaned against the kitchen island while she stood opposite him. They sipped slowly, watching each other without staring. The conversation started light, school, travel, missing home, but gently shifted into deeper waters. He told her about his mother passing away when he was 16, how he'd spent years keeping things bottled up, learning to live with empty spaces. Helen listened carefully, her heart aching in ways she didn't expect. Then, almost without meaning to, she opened up about her divorce. How David's slow withdrawal made her question her worth. How being left wasn't the hardest part, it was feeling invisible in her own life that hurt most. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just looked at her the way someone should when a heart is speaking. "You're not invisible," he said softly. Voice barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. "Not even close." Helen blinked, feeling something sting behind her eyes. She looked away, then back, trying to smile. But she couldn't. Not fully. Something in her chest was cracking open again, something she thought had closed for good. The clock read 2:47 a.m., but she didn't feel tired. Neither did he. She leaned back against the counter, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about being seen. Being known. And in the quiet hum of the kitchen, under the soft light and the late hour, something real and deeply human was unfolding. A connection no one would understand. But one she wasn't ready to let go of. Not yet. The night stretched on like a soft, endless sigh, wrapping the kitchen in a hush that only happens in the earliest hours of morning. Helen and Ethan sat across from each other now, two warm mugs between them, but the tea had long gone cold. Time had become something distant, unimportant. What kept them both in that space wasn't caffeine or politeness, it was something neither of them had expected: comfort. Real comfort. The kind you don't find often, and almost never with someone new. Helen could feel her guard slipping, not recklessly, but gently, like it wanted to fall away after holding on too long. There was no pretending anymore. Ethan wasn't just Ryan's friend. He had become something else in her eyes, a man with an old soul, who didn't look at her like she was older or broken or past anything. He looked at her like he saw everything: the loneliness, the beauty she forgot she had, the strength it took to keep smiling. His gaze wasn't pushy. It was patient. Tender. Like he was trying to memorize how she looked when she let herself be soft again. And Helen, for once, didn't hide. She leaned into the moment, into the silence, into that fragile pull that wrapped itself between them like a silk ribbon. The house creaked faintly, the only sound besides the low hum of the fridge and the thudding of her heart. Ethan finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "You're different than I expected." Helen looked up, unsure whether to laugh or ask. "Why?" He answered before she could. "You carry something in your eyes, like you've loved deeply. And lost just as deep." Her lips parted, but no words came. He wasn't wrong. It wasn't just about David anymore. It was about all the years she'd poured herself into people who never poured back. All the birthdays she made special but spent alone. All the ways she showed up, even when no one asked how she was doing. And somehow, this young man across from her, 23, maybe 24, had read it all in a few hours. She set her mug down slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the counter, trying to ground herself. "You say things like you've lived twice your age," she said gently. He smiled, a little sadly. "Losing my mom did that." His voice cracked just a little. Helen's heart softened even more. She didn't know what she was doing when she reached out and touched his hand. It wasn't romantic, not on purpose. It was human. It was kind. But the moment she did, something shifted in the room. Her fingers stayed longer than they should have. And he didn't pull away. His skin was warm against hers. Not demanding. Not suggestive. Just there. Present. Real. The kind of touch you remember even when it's gone. She should have let go. She knew that. But her hand stayed. His eyes met hers with a question she didn't answer, because she didn't know how. The clock now read 3:12 a.m. Her heart said stay. Her mind whispered don't. But neither of them moved. That night wasn't about lines crossed. It was about lines blurred. About the ache of being seen too clearly and wanting to stay in that rare light just a little longer. She served him tea, then truth, then silence. And he stayed. All night. Not because of anything physical, but because connection, real connection, doesn't follow rules. It just happens. And in that still kitchen, with nothing but dim light and unsaid words, Helen realized it had been years since someone made her feel like more than just someone's past. With Ethan, she felt like a possibility. The morning came slowly, with soft light spilling through the kitchen window, warming the counter where 2 mugs still sat untouched. Helen stood near the sink, arms crossed loosely, watching the golden glow rise over the trees. Her heart felt heavier than it had the night before, not in a painful way, but in that quiet ache you feel when something meaningful ends before it even begins. She hadn't slept. Neither had Ethan, though they'd stopped talking hours ago. At some point, he'd sat beside her in silence, and they just stayed. Not touching. Not saying a word. But that silence had held everything. Unspoken. Longing. Shared loneliness. The safety of being understood without needing to explain. Helen had never thought a connection could be that intimate without even a kiss. And maybe that's why it hurt more. Because it was real. And real things, especially the ones that come unexpected, leave a mark. Now, with sunlight pouring in, and the house slowly waking up, reality was coming back. Ryan was stirring downstairs. Soon, there would be movement, voices, coffee brewing. The spell would break. Ethan stood across from her, his eyes tired but soft. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, like he didn't want to leave that space either. But time wasn't on their side. "Thank you," he said gently, his voice almost a whisper. For last night. For you. Helen looked at him. And for a moment, she wanted to say something brave, something bold, like don't go just yet, or stay with me a little longer. But she didn't. She simply nodded, her throat tight. I didn't realize how much I needed to be seen, she said quietly. It's been a long time. Ethan took a slow step forward, not closing the distance fully, just enough to show he heard her, that he understood. You deserve more than being seen, he said. You deserve someone who stays. And maybe that's what made her heart twist, because they both knew he couldn't. Not really. He was Ryan's friend. He was young, building a life, still figuring things out. And she was standing in her ex-husband's kitchen, trying to hold on to a moment that didn't belong in the daylight. When Ryan came upstairs, yawning and calling out for breakfast, the shift was immediate. Helen smiled, tucked her hair behind her ear, and moved toward the fridge like nothing had happened. Ethan stepped back, his expression unreadable but still soft. They didn't touch. They didn't even say goodbye properly. By noon, the bags were packed. The car was ready. Ryan hugged her tight, thanked her for the home-cooked meals, and promised to visit again before fall. Ethan stood near the passenger door, hands in his pockets, waiting. As Ryan walked to the car, Ethan turned to her one last time. Their eyes locked, full of everything they hadn't said. Maybe I'll see you again, he said, a sad smile on his lips. Helen's voice caught. Maybe, she whispered. And then, he was gone. The car disappeared down the street, and the house was quiet again. But something had changed. She wasn't the same woman who stood at that kitchen window yesterday, hoping for a little company and a night of conversation. Now, she was a woman who had been seen, held in the silence, and reminded, just briefly, of what it felt like to be wanted in the smallest, most meaningful ways. That night would never happen again. It didn't need to. It was enough. Enough to remind her that her story wasn't over. Not yet.